Humans started doodling long before bored office workers put pen to paper. Our species, Homo sapiens, has long been known to paint on cave walls and etch patterns on shells and other objects. But a new study suggests that our ancestors, a species called Homo erectus, were also doodlers. Josephine Jordans, a biologist at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and her team discovered geometric scratchings on a mussel shell, doodled by Homo erectus 500,000 years ago. The shells also had holes in them where they'd been broken open to be eaten. The remains were first discovered a century ago at a dig site called Trinil on the Indonesian island of Java. But are they art? Jordans ponders that question in conversation with Nature reporter Ewan Callaway.
Can you describe the engraving for us?
It looks a bit like a zigzag pattern, and it has a part that is almost a complete zigzag. It's like an M-shaped. And then if you go a bit further on the shell, it kind of fades away because the shape of the shell is more rounded and more rough.
So these are from Indonesia, these shells?
The shells were discovered by a paleontologist who excavated the site of Trinil on Java more than 100 years ago.
And they've been sitting in a museum in Leiden for more than 100 years?
They have. They have been stored in boxes for such a long time, and they have been inspected about in the 1930s of the last century. But even though they were handled, people never found this engraving, and that's because it's hardly visible. It's only when you have light from a certain angle that it stands out. So it's not surprising that it hasn't been found before.
So what were the circumstances that you and your team were looking at these shells anew and you found these perforations and engravings?
It's kind of a coincidence, the way things often go. You're looking for something else and then you find something that you don't expect. My interest was to look at possible marine influence in Trinil, and I thought that there should be some marine shells as well. I didn't find those, but I did find many freshwater shells that looked a bit odd because they were so similar in size and it looked like something out of a factory almost. What happened then was that also by coincidence, an Australian colleague on his way to Ethiopia stayed over in the Netherlands. So he spent one whole day making photos of all the shells from Trinil in the Dubois collection. And while he was inspecting those photos, that's when he saw the engraving.
What's the significance of seeing markings or perforations in shells? Why do archaeologists, why are they so interested in it?
Well, any hominin or human-made modification tells you something about the behavior of these creatures. Whoever did this made a real effort to manufacture these straight lines and those sharp turns, which really demands a certain purposefulness, you could say, and also dexterity.
How old were these shells that you looked at?
Yeah, that was another very important thing for us to establish. There was a lot of uncertainty on the age of Trinil, and we were lucky that we found sediment inside the shells so that they could be dated. So we were able to pinpoint an age of about 500,000 years. At that time, there was no other hominin, as far as we know, around on the island of Java. So it must have been Homo erectus.
Would you call the engravings art?
Oh, that's a very good question. If you don't know the intention of the person who made it, it's impossible to call it art. But on the other hand, it is you could say, an ancient drawing. What was meant by the person who did this, we simply don't know. It could have been maybe to impress his girlfriend or to doodle a bit or to mark the shell as his own property. All kinds of reasons you could think of, but the bottom line is that we simply cannot know.
Just a few weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking about these very old cave paintings done by Homo sapiens in Indonesia on the island of Sulawesi. And the conclusion was that maybe figurative behavior, whatever you want to call it, art, was a lot more common than we've thought. I mean, what does this discovery in Homo erectus say about that?
Yeah, I think it is. It does show that it was definitely not something that was done only by Homo sapiens, and it was not something that was only occurring in Africa. this cannot be compared to the cave art from Sulawesi, which was really of another order. But it does show that instead of this kind of behavior being the result of a kind of sudden spark, it was something that accrued gradually, that was arising gradually and being developed into ever more sophisticated drawings, like the ones we see in Sulawesi.